Hey everybody, welcome to episode 3 of Keep Your Mind in Tune. We're changing it up a little bit. We're going to be coming at you with a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday until the election. And of course, we're going to keep on going after that, but we're giving you one in-depth interview in each episode. But to kick things off, another thing we're changing up, we're going to start off with a conversation with our musical guest for the day, Maggie Rose, followed by an incredible performance by her. And then we will go straight to the interview. Today's topic, talking about the Supreme Court. And it's going to be a good one. So check it out. Here's Maggie Rose. Thank you for lending us this performance of the new song. I love this.
Oh my gosh. Thanks for inviting me to do that. It's so fun. I love being a part of this scene that you guys are about.
And Kunj has been, really great to work on this project with, and he recommended.
I feel like I know them. I've never met them, but I feel like over this pandemic, we've become just friends from afar.
There are a lot of people that I now have a legitimate relationship who I don't know if I've ever been in the same.
I know. Before. I love it.
Yeah, no, they're awesome, and so they've been really helpful in getting this project off the ground. And we wanted to start featuring different music. And although I'd love to have you back one day to actually join us for a discussion on the panel.
Absolutely.
For now, I think the song, so the single is called Quarantine 45, right? That's what the title of.
That's what we called the project. So the 45 has both 2020 and Only Human on it. A-side, B-side. I'm not sure which one is which, but it doesn't really matter.
Well, that means that they're both really good, so that's not a bad thing to not be sure.
Yeah, and they complement one another. They're super different from each other, but they were made in such an interesting way, given what we're going through, that we all were recording it remotely and collaborating with people from all over the country, because that's kind of what you had to do. And in a way, it was more inclusive than so many projects I've done in the past.
Because everyone has the freedom when they're doing their own part to kind of just do whatever comes to them and kind of work off of whatever you received from the last person.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, it's just morphing constantly, and everyone has to be flexible and go with it. But I think it allowed for some creativity to emerge that maybe wouldn't have come about if it were normal times.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of businesses, although music, unfortunately, is going to take a while to come back fully, the process is now different, that, we're learning how much we can actually do remotely. I mean, I definitely look forward to being back in the same room creating music with my bandmates,
yes,
but
me too.
It's nice to know you can do it. So this was all done that way, both of the songs on the single?
Yes. Yeah. So we had someone mixing it who mixed my album Change the Whole Thing, and Tanner, who I did the record I was talking about that's done but not released, played keys. I had a bass player in LA put his part down. So we're Alabama, California, Nashville, people just sending these files around with WeTransfer, and you kind of got to involve everybody that I had worked with in the past, which was really nice, especially given how isolated I think people are feeling.
Yeah.
And what you were saying about having new friends over this time, I think it's been really important to be overly communicative to other artists through socials or whatever your way of reaching out would be, because we normally see each other on the road and we're touring, and there's this camaraderie that's been taken away from us in addition to just performing. So I've been trying to just hit up everybody that is inspiring me and just be like, hey, we'll get through it. But I've made friends that way, that
Same.
Krasno and Andy Frasco and just all these people that I have not really spent a lot of time with in person, but we've been virtually hanging out a lot.
I love both of those guys.
Both very fun, talented.
And so that's kind of why we put this whole Keep Your Mind in Tune thing together, was just to both musically collaborate and just interact with people and send music back and forth, but also to just talk about so much stuff that's going on. And as you know, I just think the song, and the reason that I think the song 2020 is so perfect is just all these topics that we're discussing are things that a year ago, if you asked me, I wouldn't believe that we'd be discussing any of these.
Oh my gosh, I know. A time traveler just like swooped in and was like, by the way, this is all going to happen in 9 months. I think
no one would believe it.
We wouldn't believe it. Yeah. We wouldn't change our course because it's just so unbelievably absurd and important and scary.
Right. And some of it is stuff that, you know, is illuminating to what's actually been going on that we're usually too busy to be aware of and see. And so that ultimately I hope is a silver lining, but the moment right now it's definitely scary, but kind of cathartic putting it through music, I think, so that you kind of like come to terms with it in your own way. So yeah, I just thought that this song was so perfect because we're going to actually be releasing an episode every Thursday and Tuesday, Thursday, right up until the election, and then probably once a week afterwards. So again, I'd love to have you back, but I thought this was a perfect first outside musical guest appearance to have, given the nature of the song and all these things we're talking about.
Thanks for sharing it.
Absolutely.
Helping me get it out there.
Absolutely.
Catharsis is definitely what I was looking for when I wrote it.
Coping. And now you're in like a beautiful, you're sitting on the dock of the bay, which is another good way of coping. A little outdoor time. Right.
Family. That's been helpful. Family, music. My sister just had a baby.
Oh, congrats.
My husband and I know you've been talking to Austin too, but we work together and it's been a bit of an opportunity because we haven't stopped working and we're trying to generate ideas to keep my band engaged and keep their chops up. I mean, you can understand how touring is almost like a regimen that you need to keep up. And we played one outside socially distanced show that was a 90-minute set. And I was like, damn, this is, I mean, I was doing this 4 nights a week, some weeks for months on end, and you're out of practice. But it's also that human connection that you really feed off of the audience. It's such a symbiotic thing. So we went to see Goose the other night at a drive-in concert in Frederick, Maryland.
Nice.
Just happened to be home when it happened, and it was so awesome to see it actually effectively working. And I felt comfortable. People were masked up, and there was just like this electrifying energy that we haven't had all year. And you could tell people were just so amped, and that might be the new normal for a little bit, but
I was walking through Central Park one day and, normally there's a lot of performers there and I'm playing music all the time, touring 150 days a year, whatever. And I usually just walk right by, but there was like a band playing and I stopped and I listened. Right. I was like, oh my God, I haven't seen this happen for like 6 or 7 months. This is crazy.
Oh yeah. We're so spoiled being in Nashville and New York where you have jazz clubs and honky tonks and constant live music that I realized how often I was spending my evenings out, school nights out to just see a band at the Basement East, which was our favorite venue, destroyed by the tornado right before the pandemic.
That's the song as well, right?
Yes. So the song talking about the tornado is both literal and figurative. And I think there's been so much destruction to our way of life this year. But I think what I saw right after the tornado, and there was about a week in between the tornado hitting and the quarantine being enforced, everyone was outside immediately rebuilding the next day. And I think that collectively that's what we're all going to do, especially after this election is over. I think that Americans are going to make the right choice for the soul of our country. I do have faith in that. 2020 hasn't eviscerated my optimism yet. And East Nashville is just one extension of what I think are big music community is all about, and that's lifting each other up. And I never knew that everyone owned a chainsaw in East Nashville until the tornado hit. I was like, wow, everyone has a chainsaw. They're putting them to work. And
yeah, I knew the surrounding areas that would be true, but I didn't know that of East Nashville.
Right. I was very impressed. Or they just appeared that day, and you could hear it throughout the whole neighborhood, just this buzzing sound of people at work for many days after it hit. And 2020 came to me after John Prine passed away.
Yeah.
And I had this crappy electric piano up in our shed that was in our backyard and had been sitting there collecting dust forever. And when you're looking at a calendar that's just been wiped clean, I was like, well, now's the time to probably learn how to play this thing.
Yeah.
And it just unlocked a writing creativity in me that I had never really felt with just an acoustic guitar or writing to a track or what have you. And
you can definitely
it led me to it.
You can hear it. You can hear it in the track. And with that said, let's check it out. This is a special performance of 2020. Let's take a look.
Thanks, Dave.
See 2020, but couldn't see the tornado coming. Sat me down when I'm usually running. Got me thinking about dumb things like money. But hey, I tried to stay high, but it took away Rogers, Withers, and Prime. But I thank God every day I'm alive, 'cause at least I see 20. 20, 20, 20. Just another day gone by. I'm a bird in a cage, forbidden to fly in a world changed overnight into a place that I don't recognize. Another storm, we all gotta weather. Does it have to get worse before it gets better? Staring down the thought that I may never hold you again. If this is the way it's always gonna be, 6 feet is where you can bury me. I see 20, 20, but couldn't see the tornado coming. Sat me down when I'm usually running. Got me thinking about dumb things like money. But hey, I tried to stay high, but it took away Rogers, Withers, and Prime. But I thank God every day I'm alive, 'cause at least I see 20, 20, yeah. 20, 20, yeah. Oh, save the day. Don't matter how much it changes. Oh, how sweet it will taste when we finally know we've made it. We'll see 20, 20. We'll see 20, 20, yeah. We'll see 20, 20.
All right, so we are here once again with Kunj, Shah, and Nikki Glaspie on our music panel. Thanks for joining us here, guys.
Absolutely.
Today we have the pleasure of being joined by Bertrall Ross, who is a constitutional law professor, election law at at Berkeley Law out in California. Thank you so much for joining us here, Professor.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And obviously the hot topic at the moment, well, there's many hot topics at the moment, but the most recent, the hearings of Amy Coney Barrett and this nomination happening so close to an election. I guess I'll start off by asking a question, which is, have you seen another confirmation this close when votes have actually been cast and election is actually underway?
No, this is the first. This is unprecedented in terms of the proximity to the election. I think that we had a policy in place, or at least the Republicans, we thought we had a policy in place that we wouldn't have these types of confirmations after what happened with Judge Merrick Garland at the last year of Obama's administration. But it turns around they had a change of heart about whether you should have confirmation hearings during an election. And here we are.
Election year is what they said, actually, and now we're in the middle of
it. Yeah, election year, and we're like in the almost like
we're at the election
in a month.
Both are cast.
We have over 30 million votes that have already been cast in this election, right? And we're 2 weeks away today from election day. So get out.
So I might have the only opposite differing opinion on this panel about this, but I actually do believe that in the Constitution, it says that if you are the president of the United States and there is a vacancy, you fill that vacancy. I think what they did 8 years ago was super messed up.
4 years ago, yeah.
4 years ago was super messed up. But I don't know. I feel like, this is something that is just part of our Constitution, but I don't know how we proceed with what happened 4 years ago. Are we just going to keep fighting back and forth? Okay, well, now it's 2 years close to the election. Now it's 3 years close to the election. Isn't there supposed to be a precedent that's set? And I guess they set the precedent. And is it just going to be who is in control of Congress that is going to decide moving forward? Is there a way to just change the laws completely where it's just whoever's president decides who's on the Supreme Court? No, Congress has no interference moving forward. Well, I'd be willing to offer them their justice as long as in the future there's a precedent that says this is no longer the case.
Yeah, Kunj, you're right. There's nothing in the Constitution that prevents the president from nominating or the Senate from confirming any time a justice or judge at any time during the president's term. And what happened, of course, 4 years ago was that a precedent was set that we're not going to do this during an election year. Now, many of us thought, Democrats and even some Republicans thought that was an ill-conceived precedent. We hadn't done that before. That was the new thing, right? Mm-hmm. The problem here is that, well, you set the precedent 4 years ago. You said that this was going to be the policy going forward. We have Senator Graham on tape and saying, even if it's in Trump's last term, we will not go through a confirmation.
Use my words against me.
Right. They would not go through a confirmation hearing. And yet they did so. And I think it's the hypocrisy that is bothering a lot of people with respect to this policy going forward. But you're right. In terms of
why was that able to happen? What system is in place that doesn't let the president, for people who don't know, just appoint who? Does the Congress need to have a majority vote on? I know the confirmation, but they didn't even hear the nomination.
Right. There's a lot of control that the majority leader in the Senate has over scheduling. And that control can only be taken away by a majority vote of the Senate. And since the Senate was controlled by Republicans in 2016, and is controlled by Republicans now, they have a lot of control over scheduling a hearing. And so what Senate Majority Leader McConnell did back in 2016 was avoid putting Republicans in a difficult spot. Right? He didn't want to even get to a hearing. He didn't want to get to a vote, because I think that they understood that if Merrick Garland was put before the American people, it would be hard to argue that this person's not qualified to be a justice. Mm-hmm. Right? And so they didn't want to get to that point. And Senate Majority Leader McConnell exercised his prerogative to prevent anything from going to the floor. But this all can be adjusted. You could pass a law saying that the Senate is required to hold hearings and to have a confirmation vote of any presidential nominee that comes before it, right, within a certain specified period of time. Right, you could pass that law, and you could sort of dictate to the Senate how they have to manage these types of proceedings. But that law is not in place yet, and I don't know if it will be in place in the future.
Does that have to go through the House and the Senate, or does that, and then it has to be signed by the president?
I mean, the Senate could establish a rule, but the Senate could just overturn that rule when it has control, when another party has control. If you want something to be more entrenched, you want to pass a statute that would have to go through the House and be signed by the president. Would the president be willing to sign a bill? I think he would, because this would give the president the certainty that their nominees would go through, and that there would be a statute in place that requires their nominees to go through a confirmation process. Not a favorable vote, but a confirmation process.
A confirmation process, yeah.
Right.
Now, were there always 9 Supreme Court justices? From my understanding that, there used to be, a system where maybe they had added different Supreme Court justices, but it had to do with like justices traveling on horseback to preside over like different cases. Like what's the story of that?
Yeah, so there's 2 different things going on. Back in the early days of the Republic, the justices used to ride circuit, what they call a ride circuit. So they would sit on Court of Appeals as well as serving as Supreme Court justices. In terms of the number of justices, it's fluctuated between 5 and 10 over the course of our history. There's no constitutional requirement that there be 9 justices. This is just based on statutory mandates that set the number of justices at 9. So you can shift the number of justices upward, or if a justice dies or resigns or retires, you could pass a statute saying that the number of justices will be reduced by 1 or 2 or however many numbers. So there's no constitutional limit in terms of requirement with respect to the number of justices.
Do you believe in packing of the court?
Do I believe in packing of the court? I think it's a bit of a dangerous game. I just don't know what the end of packing the court would be. If one party decides that they want to add justices during their term in office in the Senate and controlling the presidency, then what's the limits, what's the constraint on the other party doing the same? And if you keep going down this tit for tat path, you're all of a sudden in a situation where my friend says, maybe we should have 100 justices on the court. But then if you kind of get to that point, well, the Supreme Court loses its integrity and legitimacy as an institution. It just becomes a partisan pawn. And if we get to that point, that very much undercuts our Republican form of government that depends on these 3 branches acting as checking bodies on each other. If one branch is deemed illegitimate by the people, then it's left to Congress and the president to hammer out differences, which we see is often difficult when the president is of one party and Congress is of another.
Yeah, an eye for an eye makes the whole government blind.
Absolutely.
Yes, it does. So you're saying that like there's no limit, as to like how many justices can be on the Supreme Court. So let's say that Amy is confirmed, and just for argument's sake, Biden becomes a president. So you're saying that he can then appoint a justice if he wants to?
Yeah, so they pass a statute that increases the number of justices on the court to 11, say. They're doing it to make up for the Merrick Garland and to make up for the Coney Barrett episode. And now and then he nominates 2 justices, and the Senate, controlled by Democrats, presumably under this scenario, confirms them. And now they are members of the court. And then you see it in 2024, right? And went to the White House.
And then in 4 years,
bigger.
And in 4 years or 2 years, the Republicans do the same thing, and they're better at this game than we are.
Right.
Well, that's what I was going to say, though. Like at a certain point, they played dirty when they had control, and I don't think anyone can deny that, even if you're a Republican and you wanted that to happen, and that wasn't a norm. They broke the norm, and they went out of their way to say that a president in his last entire year couldn't appoint a justice, which is pretty absurd. Now that happened, I do feel like the Democrats are notorious for, not retaliating, not being as ruthless. And so, yes, it could go back and forth forever, but I mean, the 6-9 majority with young justice, I mean, that's going to affect a lot of things for a really long time. And I think that's why so many people who aren't morally in line with this president have been okay with him, because not only the Supreme Court justices, but he's appointed 200 plus judges all over the country.
Yeah,
always been paying attention to other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very difficult position we're in right now, Dave, in terms of, Democrats just can't, they feel like they can't lie down. We can't just do nothing, say the Democrats, right? The question is, well, what do we do? What can we do? And the options are quite limited, right? You could imagine, well, maybe we should impose term limits on Supreme Court justices. That's one option floating about, but you need a constitutional amendment to do that. And the likelihood a constitutional amendment will pass, limiting the terms of justices, are pretty low, right? It's hard to pass a constitutional amendment. Well, what are other things? There's all these sort of complex statutory shenanigans that you can do by making certain justices senior justices and other justices junior justices as a way of balancing it out. But these get really complicated. And the more complicated your proposal is, the harder it is to sell to the American people as something that needs to be done, or it's harder to have it be understood by the American people.
I thought there was no term limits on Supreme Court. Sorry to cut you off. I apologize. I thought you're done. I thought the term limit on Supreme Court justices did not exist. And forgive me for my naive seventh grade social studies look at this, but I thought we didn't have term limits on justices so that they weren't beholden to any party.
Right. That's exactly right. And it was designed to create independence for the judges and justices, right? Now, I think that Democrats and maybe others would be willing to just sacrifice that for purposes of having and ensuring some degree of turnover in terms of judges and justices. And to be fair to their point of view, what they would argue is that, well, when we didn't have term limits back in the early parts of the Republic, we also had life expectancy that was much lower than it is now, right? And so judges and justices weren't serving on it as a general matter for the long terms that they are serving now. Now we have justices and judges that are appointed at 40 and up, right, and in their 40s. And if they have a longevity of a Justice Stevens or a Justice Justice Ginsburg, then that's 30, 40, 50 years on the court. And so that's the part of it that concerns people. And that's why some people might be willing to sacrifice some independence or pretense of independence for limited terms.
So I think a lot of people are scared right now, but, with Amy Coney Barrett, she can't overturn Roe v. Wade, because aren't there, I don't know how you say it, but stare decisis, once a court rules on a decision, it's not supposed to overturn it, and it becomes the law of the land, right? So you can't just go and overturn Supreme Court rulings.
Yeah, so it's a prudential consideration, meaning that, it is something that is a norm, that is kind of the expectation that the decision that was made will stand. But the Supreme Court has always given itself discretion to overturn precedent that it thinks is wrongly decided. So that was
super precedent was
not super precedent, right? It's the basis for overturning Plessy v. Ferguson, for example, a case that allowed for separate but equal and ultimately allowed for Jim Crow segregation throughout the country. That was overturned in Brown v. Board of Education, right, which provided for integration or prohibition on segregation by law. And so, you do have courts in our history and some positive examples of overturning precedent. I think that many people would not think overturning Roe v. Wade is not as a positive example, but given the past in which the court has overturned precedent, there is still the opportunity and discretion to do so now.
And in terms of the specifics of Amy Coney Barrett, I mean, while she is, extremely intelligent, obviously, and capable in terms of her faculties and what she knows, and, regardless of her opinions being maybe the total opposite of somebody like myself or other people or her views, she has only served for 3 years, correct? And that seems, and she's very young, which I think is a strategic move. That's not a coincidence. And also, is it normal for justices to not be able to weigh in on anything that they're asked in a hearing? I mean, just in terms of us understanding her, what she's going to behave like on the Supreme Court.
It's not normal based on our deeper past in terms of what the Senate was supposed to do in the confirmation process was to assess the qualifications of the person to serve as a judge or justice, which included interrogation of the judge and justice's views or the nominee's views on particular issues. And we had a practice in which there would be these questions and they would be answered. Now, there were confirmation hearings that many were pro forma, in which there was very few questions asked. But in the beginning of the sort of early parts of the 20th century, we started to have a more inquisitorial approach to confirmation hearings in which senators would ask probing questions, and they would often get at least some answers, many more than Coney Barrett was willing to provide. Then we had the Robert Bork nomination in 1987. And Robert Bork was very open in expressing his views of the Constitution, which were very conservative and even libertarian. And as a result, those views were weaponized against him, and he was rejected by the Senate. And so a new playbook emerged in which you say little, say nothing. Do not express your views, right?
And Ginsburg kind of did that, right?
Ginsburg did that, absolutely, right? And most rational nominees will do that. If that's the path to getting me confirmed to a job I've always wanted, I will follow that playbook. And so it's full of, let me just kind of provide you with an analysis of cases that you all know about. But then in terms of opining about how I would rule on a case that might arise, I'm going to say nothing. I'm going to fill you up with empty bromides about nothingness, right? And that was a playbook that Coney Barrett played to the extreme, right? We got nothing out of her, even the most non-controversial legal issues. She's like, I am saying nothing, because if I open the door to say something about anything, they might require me to say something about something more that might get me in trouble, right?
The blank pad, I actually
the blank pad, right? Which is a reminder: say nothing.
I wish we had these hearings for local judges. I've just filled out my ballot for Nassau County, my absentee ballot, and I used Ballotpedia. We should put a little thing here for when people are looking for who to vote for on their justices. They gave me 8 options, and I was able to vote for 8 justices, and there was only 8 justices. Now, in the Democratic column, Republican column, and conservative column, they were all the same justices. So I had to plug in so most people that I know, like my father would go in, and not to throw him under the bus, but he would vote Democrat along the line for as many people that he could vote for. But when I did my research on Ballotpedia, I noticed that 3 or 4 out of the 8 justices, and they let you pick up to 8, had run as Republicans in the past, but now are running as Democrat, conservative, and Republicans. So people don't even know the views of who they're voting for. And if they're voting along party lines, they're voting for Republican judges without knowing it. And then there are some sections where there's only one judge, and that judge, even though it said Democrat, it was a Republican judge that you were voting for say, family court or something like that, And I don't know why that's going on.
I mean, you're touching on a point that's just the really difficult aspect of democracy. Americans are being asked to make choices on so many things for which they have so little time and so few resources to be informed on these many things. And voting for judges is one of those things, right? And so at least in Nassau County, you have sort of partisan affiliation it may be inaccurate, which is very problematic, but there's a lot of places where you don't even have partisan affiliation of judges, right? You just have a name of a judge. How am I to know who this judge is? Right. How do I know what his ideological predisposition or her predisposition is? How do I know how she's ruling on particular cases, right? And yet you as an American are being asked to make that choice as to which judge should be appointed or continued for their term. And I think that that's a challenging part. Unless we're able to devote more education, resources, time to people to make these decisions, it's a question of whether these decisions should be made some other way.
Awesome. So I actually have a question for you. Just like Kunj, like, you know, the 7th grade social studies education here. So can you tell me the difference between well, actually, I guess like what courts they serve and the difference between the two? The justices or the judges that are appointed like by the president, like I'm aware that Trump put in 200 judges, as opposed to like the ones that we vote in. Like I don't really know the difference, you know, between the two and like how that works and what courts they're serving it.
Absolutely. And that's a confusion for many, many Americans. And so what we have at the federal system is the constitutional requirement that these judges be nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. And these include district judges, which are trial judges, federal trial judges that exist in states throughout the country. They also include federal courts of appeals, for which there are 11 different circuits covering all parts of the country, and they hear appeals from these federal trial courts. And then there is the Supreme Court, of course, which hears appeals from the different federal appeals court. Now, what do these federal courts do? They're supposed to address federal questions arising under the Constitution or federal statutes. They occasionally hear state questions arising from state statutes or the state constitutions, but those are generally decided by state courts. Now, as to state courts, there are state courts in all 50 states, of course. Some states allow for the election of judges, right? And other states provide for the appointment of judges. So some states follow the federal model and provide for the governor to nominate and the legislature to confirm, and other states provide for the people to elect judges. And there's some variations also within those different types, but that's generally how it works. And so when you have a state and then you have judges even at the local level, county judges, right? Local judges are working at the city level, right? And there's variations in how these individuals are, whether they're elected or subject to some sort of appointment system. So there's just so many variations based on the many levels of government that exist in our country that, again, creates a lot of the confusion about what do these judges do, right? And so state judges are supposed to handle state issues for the most part, and they can handle federal issues as well, though, which creates a complication. Local judges are supposed to handle local issues, but they can also handle state issues, right? So there's all this kind of complication that arises with respect to what these judges are appointed or elected to do, but they exist at all different levels of government.
Following up on what Nikki said, why did Obama leave so many spots open? Is that one of his biggest failures? Is it because he couldn't get them approved? Is that normal? Do most presidents do that? Or are we going to see long-term ramifications of it?
Yeah, so I think that it has been a challenge when the Senate is controlled by one party and the president is controlled by the other party. Often the Senate will act as will obstruct Senate presidential nominees. And so what they'll do is they won't necessarily reject them by a vote, but they'll do what Senator McConnell did with Judge Merrick Garland, in which they won't schedule hearings for that particular judge, right? They'll keep delaying consideration of that judge. And so that's what Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, he not only did it with Judge Merrick Garland, that was the most sort of notable issue that people are aware of. He did this with hundreds of judges that were put forth by President Obama. And that had led to these gaps.
Hundreds of judges?
Yes.
Hundreds of judges.
200 plus judges that got appointed because of Donald Trump, because they were vacant when Obama left office.
Exactly. So these vacancies, President Obama wanted to fill them, right? Now, there's some complaints about he was slow in nominating some folks, but that wasn't the principal problem. The principal problem was that he had to deal with an obstruction of the Senate, and therefore he had to kind of try to work to just get anybody through. And so all these vacancies that were left open, and it's also due to some retirements, gave Trump the opportunity to fill a lot of these positions, which will not only lead to a very conservative Supreme Court for the foreseeable future, absent changes in the structure of the court, but also very conservative Court of Appeals and very conservative federal trial courts as well, or disproportionately conservative trial.
Until 5 years ago, I always thought that the judicial system was almost untouchable and that these judges were not political in any way. I was naive. I thought it was a very, just like that is the one sacred part of our democracy is the Supreme Court and all the courts in the land, and the judges are supposed to be nonpartisan.
Yeah, that's the ideal, and that's what judges like Amy Coney Barrett try to sell to the American people, that all I'm here is to make decisions, as Justice Roberts said, call balls and strikes, to what Judge Amy Coney Barrett says, I'm just going to sort of interpret the law according to the law. But the reality is that the Constitution, which is the primary thing that they are involved in interpreting, is full of vaguenesses and ambiguities, right? There's no simple matter of interpreting the law as the law. There's a lot of discretion built into the constitutional language. And this was intentional because the framers of the Constitution meant for the Constitution to evolve to respond to changing circumstances, right? They knew that if they set a framework for that particular time that they were in, it would not be relevant for the future. So they sought to make it relevant by making it more capacious and more open. And so that is a part of the challenge with sort of having judges that could just neutrally decide what the law is. And so since there's this discretion, then values will enter into decision-making. And once values enter decision-making, then who you appoint is going to be a highly political decision. And that's what it's become. And
for Trump, love him or hate him, he surrounds himself with people who he believes are going to support him in a time of questioning. And there's no more relevant situation than the one we're about to face in 2 weeks. Nikki, you and I were talking about this earlier. If it doesn't look blue night of and doesn't continue to look blue afterwards, and even if it does, in terms of results, this is going to be unprecedented with how long we wait for results. He's been casting doubt. What are the possibilities there? I mean, if do electors technically have to vote for who the popular vote in their state, ends up going for? Can they assign them? I think technically they can assign them to whoever they want. So those governors could end up with it, the Senate, the Supreme Court. How, it doesn't, there's three possible ways, right, that could play out where he has the right people in place to keep him in power.
Absolutely. So it starts kind of at the top with the court. You kind of have a Supreme Court in place that you think will be responsive to your preferences if disputes arise with respect to this election. And then if you look to sort of how the Constitution and the Electoral Account Act sets up the frame for deciding these elections, the state legislature has considerable discretion in terms of how it appoints, who it decides to appoint as the electors. So there's a Republican slate of electors that each state has, and a Democratic slate of electors that each state has. And then it's up for the legislature to decide which slate goes to Congress to be counted. And so you have a potential situation in which there is a different leader on election day than what arises after the election, after all the ballots are counted. Now, if Trump is a leader on election day, I think it's probably likely that he will declare himself victor, even though the ballots have not been counted. And then after the ballots have been counted, then we find that actually Biden won that election. But now we're already in constitutional crisis. We have a president claiming victory, and then he's trying to delegitimize the other ballots that are coming in later as being fraudulent, right? And given the level of distrust that Americans have into the system, given that we live in a fact universe in which nobody believes each other, or few people believe each other's facts, we're going to be in sort of a situation where we have to have an independent institution decide these questions. And that institution has historically been the court, right? But then you have the problem of, the court seems to be rigged in the minds of some Democrats to favor Donald Trump. And so how do we move forward if this crisis were to occur? I'm just hoping it doesn't occur. I'm hoping there's a clear victor on election day, but there's great potential for it without any institutions necessarily having the legitimacy to resolve it cleanly.
Didn't that happen with George Bush's brother in the Florida Supreme Court, where they stopped counting the recount because he basically said that, the Supreme Court, he got the Supreme Court to just say anything that's been counted has been counted. So is there a chance that our U.S. Supreme Court will just say whatever was decided on election day is final?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's kind of a deeper story with the Bush v. Gore situation. There's a sort of famous Bush v. Gore decision stopping the recount, but there's also discussions between Republican operatives and the governor, being Bush's brother, to slate the electors for Bush in Congress, right? Even before the recount was concluded. And so there is talk about, appointing Republican electors in the state of Florida. It didn't come to that because the Supreme Court resolved the issue. You could have a situation where I don't think the Supreme Court will decide that the count on election day is the only count that matters. They may allow the counts to go forward, but they may sort of listen to the disputes of the ballots that are coming in late. There may be disputes about whether they got there on time, whether they were postmarked on the right date, whether they were entered into, whether there's signature verification signatures were appropriate. There may be all these disputes that arise that lead to a bunch of ballots being thrown out potentially, and as a result, shifting the winner from one candidate to the other. That could be something I could see the Supreme Court doing. I'm optimistic perhaps about this, that they would just decide that we're not going to count any ballots that come in after Election Day or that are counted after Election Day, because that would be so far out of the norm. But again, we're living in abnormal times.
Yeah, I mean...
Go ahead, Nikki.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of things and issues that obviously more questions that I have about all of this. Because it feels like right now, in 2 weeks, we're going to be at a crossroads as far as our democracy is concerned. If this goes to, the Supreme Court and after that, is it possible that generals can, remove the president, if he does not want to relinquish power? And then also, I mean, we talked to Professor Douglas, and I think I remember him saying that all of the ballots would be counted. It doesn't matter as far as it being an absentee ballot or whatever. I mean, as long as it's in before the deadline. But as far as anyone that has done early voting or that has done absentee voting, obviously I think they're going to have to be counting for multiple days, because there's already been 30 million votes cast, there's no way, how many people can count 30 million ballots, I just everything is just so swirling and it's a mess. And obviously the person in power doesn't want to relinquish power. He's already said that. Even if homie wins, he's not gonna leave easily. So it's where do we go from there?
It's a really difficult situation. And my biggest fear is the scenario you describe in terms of, it's in a sense running out the clock, right? So we have the big dilemma we have is that some states cannot process, according to their laws, ballots until the day before the election or the day of the election. And it takes time to process ballots. What does processing ballots means? Well, you have to verify the signatures on all the ballots. You have to make sure they're included in the right envelopes. You have to kind of flatten them out. You have to do a whole bunch of things to just get them into the machine to be counted, right? And if you have millions upon millions upon millions of these in your system and you haven't been able to count them, process them until Election Day, it's going to take several days after the election to process and ultimately count these ballots. And during this time, as we are waiting, you're going to get results from the state. I'm talking about states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. You're going to get some preliminary results based on the ballots that have been counted, right? Not accounting for all the many ballots that haven't been counted. And there's going to be a long wait until we get more results. And during that long wait, we're going to have people questioning the legitimacy of this election potentially, right? We're going to have people saying there's something fishy going on. Why is it taking so long, right? And we'll have sort of news media jumping onto this train and say, yeah, the president says there's something fishy going on. There must be something fishy going on. And then you have a sort of sowing this doubt in a context of great mistrust of the system that leads to a scenario in which the president could potentially legitimately claim that I haven't lost this election, right? I know the ballots are coming in, but we know that given all that's going on, the delays, this must be rigged, right? And then do we expect the generals to step in to remove them? I don't think so. They don't want to get involved in this partisan game. They'll say, look, you other institutions, it's going to be passing the hot potato, right, throughout if we have this scenario. No, you deal with this court. No, we're not dealing with this. You deal with this military. No, we're not dealing. You deal with this Congress. No, we can't deal with this.
Okay, I can't sit with that answer though. Where does hot potato land? You know, who's the ultimate decider? How do
we don't want to sit with it, but it's the first time, right?
I just don't know, and that's the open question, There is nothing in our Constitution. Our Constitution seems to assume peaceful transfers of power, right? So they don't provide for any mechanism to handle a scenario that we're facing right now.
Electors don't even have to vote for, like, he could get the governors of those states to say, you know what, we're going to cast the votes for, you know, whatever, Ohio, Pennsylvania, any number of states. That's not technically written down either, right? A lot of this stuff is formalities.
It's not, right? And we don't know if the governor's certified electors will be counted, or the legislators sent electors will be counted in a disputed state. So you have states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin are 3 states in which you have Republican Republican legislatures and Democratic governors. And so you can imagine if there's dispute in these pivotal states, and you have 2 different institutional bodies sending 2 different slates of electors to Congress, and then Congress being what it is in terms of how do you sort of determine which slate of electors counts when you have a Republican Senate and a Democratic Congress? Or Democratic House? How do you respond? How do you get over this gridlock? Who decides? And
there's that Nancy Pelosi becomes the president of the United States.
If the clock ultimately runs out completely, right? There's no decision. There has to be someone appointed on January 20th. That is a constitutional requirement. And so somebody seated as a president. And if there's no resolution between the president and Biden by then there's an opening for Nancy Pelosi to assume the seat of the presidency.
But resolution by who? Who makes that final decision?
They just can't decide. If there's nobody, whether Congress, the courts, military, whoever, they just can't decide who won the election. There's no decision on the winner. And so if we get to that point by January 20th, then Nancy Pelosi is president of the United States and I don't know how long that continues.
I'm sure Trump fans are going to be thrilled about that.
Yeah. Right, I'm sure, right. I don't know how long that would continue, whether you just kind of keep trying to suss it out because we haven't had that type of situation before, and there's no statutory mandates in terms of or suggestions as to what you do in that scenario. But that's a possibility.
And if that scenario happens and Nancy Pelosi steps in as president, does she serve a full term?
That's the question. I do not know the answer to that.
It's all, see, like, this is the thing right here, right? Like, there is no definitive answer. There's no definitive answer. And that to me is like, it's a perfect storm for a tyrant.
It is. And that's the problem, right? And I imagine that after this election, if Biden were to win, I would hope that Congress would pass a statute to sort these things out, right? We just can't have this gap in our law that on the most pivotal occasion that happens in our republic, the election.
I think that Joe Biden should say, hey guys, we won't pack the courts. Let's set a precedent that no longer can ever happen, but also set a precedent that, you know, when the election results come in, these are the results, you know, and set a bunch of precedents so we're not all left scratching our heads. We need to, you know, complete this living document of the Constitution. Like, it needs to be finished so that, you know, every contingency is accounted for.
Yeah. And I agree.
This conversation just scared the shit out of me.
Yeah, I mean, especially as it pertains to the leader. Especially as it pertains to that. I understand the Constitution being, you know, allowing room for change, because there's been lots of change. And I talked about this last night with, you know, it's like, it used to be against the law for like me and Dave to be in the same room. You know what I mean? So it's like, yes, you have to allow for change. But as far as picking a definitive leader, like, that is a problem.
Right.
I don't think that people actually know, you know, how deep this rabbit hole goes.
No, I think
like, what can we do about it? What can we do about it?
I think it's not forgetting this election after the election. What the mistake we often make is the election's over. Okay, we can move on to other things. No, we need to remember what happened in this election and try to fix it. Set up the procedural requirements for succession in as much detail as is possible. And the American people need to continue to put pressure because on our representatives to do that, to do your job. And a big challenge is there's a lag, right? After the election, the president isn't sort of seated until January 20th, right? So there's a 2-month lag in which we say, oh, we're done, right? And then we're moving on. We have major problems in this country that we need to deal with, that we all know about. But we have to get this fixed. And I hope that the American people will continue to put pressure on representatives to fix this.
And the representatives are in a bit of a gamble too, because if they go all the way to try to keep Trump in power, but then it turns out that decision goes the other way, now their future hopes of reelection have been compromised. So I think a lot of those people are kind of doing this dance right now where they're like, I don't know if I should stand up for what is actually, at least implied, if not specified in the Constitution, or if I should bet on the fact that he's going to stay in power and I want to stay in his good graces.
And that's the Republican dilemma since the beginning of the Trump presidency, right? Loyalty to the president is demanded by Donald Trump, right? And if you are disloyal, he will openly try to ruin your career by prevent you from being reelected, by supporting an opponent to your election during a primary, by making your life very hard. And this has led to a number of retirements. This has led to a number of failed elections as a result of Trump supporting the opponent or not supporting sufficiently enough the particular candidate. And so, yeah, you're in a dilemma, because if you ultimately fail to back Trump and you start to sort of stand up for principles, right, then the consequences, if Trump ultimately is the victor, on you are going to be great. He sees everything that's done against him as an act of betrayal. And so it's going to take, are there enough Republicans willing to stand up for principle if we come into this crisis situation? That
like
is
Jeff Flake just got out.
Got out, absolutely. Jeff Flake, others got out, right? And
there's been a whole bunch. There's been so many.
Absolutely, right.
That resign and step down, and
yeah.
As I watched it, I was like, "This is incredible!" Like, you were his dude like 2 seconds ago.
Absolutely,
What happened?
Exactly, and that's
Lindsey Graham. Where literally, I've watched campaign ads where he calls Trump xenophobic, a detriment to America, blah blah blah, and now that's his biggest supporter as well. So it's just like, but I wonder if Obama went and campaigned, or if Biden campaigns hard for, even if he doesn't have the majority, to get these justices nominated. Like, should Obama have been campaigning harder to push through these justices and tell the American people the importance of what, and I know the past is the past, but maybe that's a lesson we can learn from the future, is that maybe we should be as vigorous about at least not berating our own party, but the other party for not even acknowledging our nominations.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's always been a critique of Democrats with respect to the court. The court hasn't been as central to Democratic policy, Democratic agendas as it has been for Republican policy and Republican agendas. And given that it's lower on the agenda, we didn't see that level of active campaigning that we might have expected from a Republican president put in that same situation back in 2016. And we didn't see the same sort of campaigning and open criticism of the Democrats as obstructionists that we saw even during the Bush administration, when a Democratic senator was trying to act as an obstruction to Bush nominees, right? And we saw the Democrats give quite a bit of ground during that particular period that the Republicans were less willing to give when they controlled the Senate and a Democratic president controlled the White House. And so it requires sort of moving it up the agenda space. And I think that the opportunity will be there, because what we're likely to see over the next few years are very conservative decisions by the Supreme Court and likely by a Court of Appeals and federal trial courts. And as a result, that could lead to sort of overturning Roe v. Wade, but it also could lead to more insidious forms of conservative decision-making, such as limiting access to abortion so that women's reproductive freedom is a joke in many states, right? And so I think that those types of moves, right, limiting sort of racial equality, sexual orientation equality, all these other sort of moves that might be made by a conservative court or courts may sort of animate and may motivate Democrats to put judges in the court more higher on their agenda.
Well, I feel like a lot of people don't really know what the Federalist Society is. And I have Democrat, very far left leaning who are in law school, and they're joining the Federalist Society because they do want to be a judge one day. And people don't realize how much, and I think one of the senators in the Supreme Court hearing utilized all of his time to talk about the dark money that's in play with the Federalist Society. So there's going to be very few liberal judges to begin with. So even in liberal states where the Congress is, putting through laws, the Supreme Court of the state could just overturn them.
Absolutely. The Supreme Court, federal courts can overturn them too, right? Saying that they're inconsistent with the federal constitution as well. And so, yeah, there are many sort of progressive laws and progressive gains made over the past couple decades, right? Starting with same-sex marriage, protecting to a certain extent reproductive freedom. All of these things are at risk right now. And courts and conservative courts have these cases or have these issues. Some of them haven't been in their crossfire, right? In the sense that I imagine that there will be decisions that very much limit reproductive freedom, that may subject to threat same-sex marriage, that may make guns more, or strike down gun legislation designed to restrict access to certain types of weaponry that are harms to the public. I imagine that this will be part of the agenda to move forward, more religion in schools, or more funding or allowance for funding of religious schools and such. I think that these will all be part of the court's jurisprudence going forward. And the question again will be sort of, how do Democrats and progressives respond?
Well, for people who aren't listening, can you kind of explain what the Federalist Society?
Sure, absolutely.
And how dark money plays into it?
Yeah, so the Federalist Society is an organization that started in, I think it was the 1970s, maybe the 1980s, that is comprised of, it denominates itself as nonpartisan in the sense that it's promoting a particular reading of the Constitution that's grounded in sort of an originalist methodology that accords with what the framers intended for the Constitution to mean. But it tends to orient in a very conservative direction in terms of their viewpoint as to what the Constitution requires, for example. And so the Federalist Society now exists in every law school, and it has an umbrella organization that exists in Washington, D.C. And they rely quite a bit on funding from different actors to advance its particular program. And so they advance their program through education programs in schools by bringing conservative speakers to law schools to express particular points of view. And what Federalist Society does well, and I appreciate, is that they also bring in an alternative viewpoint to counter that view. So there's kind of a back and forth, but it's allowance for conservative views to kind of get out there. But they're also a central mechanism by which, or a central institution that Republican presidents look to in terms of judicial nominees. They provide recommendations for judicial nominees. They rate judicial nominees, and it seems that Republican presidents have to, in a sense, get the approval of the Federalist Society for judicial nominees to satisfy the Republican base. And so they are an important actor in that particular space, and they use their money to propagate their ideas throughout the country, mostly through the vehicle of law schools, but they also do so in other institutions by holding conferences that bring judges together, including justices on the Supreme Court, to talk about issues with respect to the Constitution. That has been very effective. And the liberal counterpart right now is the American Constitution Society, and it's a newer institution, and it has grown over the past decade, but it hasn't quite caught up to the impact and influence of the Federalist Society. We'll see what happens going forward, because these things can and probably will even out, but right now they haven't yet.
Those names are kind of confusing, because Federalists I don't think of as conservative. I thought that was sort of, and then constitutional, like, I don't know, that's very confusing the way those two things are named.
It totally is. I agree.
Well, it's supposed to be state rights and the anti-federalists, but
yeah.
But then that's not true when it comes to abortion and
yeah.
There's all sorts of people. It's all over the spectrum, these views. They don't actually,
absolutely right.
Not all libertarian. It's just kind of cherry picked from different, random moral values. No, maybe not random moral values, but that's what drives them, I think. And it's a scary time, but hopefully everyone, as Kunj just put on his vote mask, everyone should wear a mask and also vote. So you're covering.
Everybody needs to wear a mask.
Absolutely. And we can work through our confusion by expressing our views at the polls, right? And I know that there may be some issues for which we are not as familiar with as others, but for those issues that we are informed about, we know about, right? Our voices need to be heard. And so I encourage all of you, we're 2 weeks from Election Day. In many, many states, you can vote early. Check vote.org. It's a great website that gives you some information about voting, but also you can check the Secretary of State sites of your particular states to figure out how to vote, come up with a vote plan, and get out there and vote.
That's the most important thing. Well, thank you so much, Professor. This has been a lot of information, and although it's scary, it's really good to have an understanding of it. So we're empowered to get out and vote and do what we can, be aware of what's to come. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Dave. Thank you, Kunj. Thank you, Nikki. It was great to be here with you, and happy to do it again if the opportunity arises.
Thank you for
that'd be awesome. I definitely love to talk to you more and like pick your brain more about this stuff, because it's important to be informed, right? Like, we need this information, and I think that there are a lot of Americans that do not know, and me being one of them, that especially because I am a black female, a black gay female, like, this definitely affects me, the most. I would say, as far as, it's crazy.
So after the election, we might need some even more information.
I know. Well, I want to commend you all on the great service that you're doing for music fans everywhere, because, these are the types of things we need to do in order to have, more Americans just understand how these things work and what's going on so that they can make informed decisions.
Do you have one last message of hope before I run into oncoming traffic?
Kunj really wants a message. I see the look on his face.
We've been through a lot as a country. Remember that. We've been through a lot to get to where we are. And just to look at this set of panelists that we have here, right, just shows how far we have come, right? And I do believe in the strength of the American ideal, the democratic ideal of inclusion and access and opportunity, and I hope that our voices kind of will push in that particular direction. We've been through many, many crises as an American people before, and we've overcome them all, and I'm hopeful that we will overcome this one.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is that I think that we've been here before, maybe not quite like this. Yeah, but we've definitely been in tough spots before. And we found a way to get through it. So that's what I'm relying on. I'm relying on all of these people that, the justices, the judges, the lawyers, that they really, the reason why they would want to practice the law to begin with is, so that it's like clean cut. It's like, this is right and this is wrong. So I'm just hoping that they do rely on that and not just like opinions or money, but like, that is a hope. Obviously, we live in a capitalist society, so
I've never had so many friends leave the music industry to become lawyers into the last 2, 3, 4 years. It's unbelievable. 3 of my employees have gone to law school, so that does give me hope.
Yeah, my manager left to go to law school.
I'm not ready for that. I'm gonna stick with this stuff.
Yeah, I'm not either, but honestly, like, I'm considering like running for something. You know what I mean? Like city council or like something, because I believe that's what it takes. Is that it takes regular people, right, to get involved and to serve, because you have these people that have special interests that are not serving. And that's what I believe. That's like what democracy is built on, is the people that are actually in office serving the people.
Absolutely. I think that's a great addendum to my suggestion about voting. Vote now, think about running for office next, because I think we need a more diverse array of Americans that are part of our institutions of governance.
Yeah, and we can do it. It's we can. It's like, just bite the bullet,
as long as you can still play drums.
Anymore. It's like, you know what? I'm gonna run for office. At least I'll have a job.
That's true.
Somebody sent me a thing where it was like all the presidents that we've ever had. And we've had nationalist presidents before. We've had people, I know Donald Trump might seem like the worst in our lifetime, but you've had the McCarthys. You've had people that were nationalists. You've had people that were really, really awful. And it might seem worse than ever because we don't learn about that in our history books. But I think we will get through this, you know, conservative judge is on the Supreme Court or not, or, you know, I think we as a nation, or I hope we as a nation, will get through this. I'm also talking to myself.
That's a good note to leave off on. Thank you guys all so much. This has been amazing. Appreciate it.
Great to see you guys.
Yeah.
See you guys again. Take care.
Take care.